A story told by a young woman. The rain began suddenly, as it often does at the end of October. Large, heavy drops lashed the asphalt, turning it into a black mirror where reflections of lanterns and neon signs trembled. I was standing under the awning of the At the Centaur bar, wrapping myself in a thin autumn coat that seemed useless against the damp wind that chilled me to the bone. What a fool, I thought. I should have dressed warmer. I saw the weather forecast this morning. The last customers had left half an hour ago, leaving behind the smell of beer, tobacco, and cheap cologne. I wiped the tables, arranged the chairs, and counted the earnings under the tired gaze of the bartender. Now that the work was finished, a heavy exhaustion washed over me, the kind that accumulates after a 12-hour shift on your feet. "Go on, why are you hanging around?" the bartender said, locking the door behind us. "Will your man pick you up? Look at that downpour." "He should have," I muttered, instinctively pulling out my phone. The screen remained black despite my persistent pressing of the button. Damn it! The battery died after lunch. Wrapped up in the flow of orders, I forgot to charge it. And here was the result. I couldn't call or even order a taxi through the app. A message had arrived during the day when the phone was still alive, explaining that he was sent on an urgent business trip and wouldn't be able to meet me. Warm words, but little comfort now. Almost midnight, rain, empty streets on the outskirts of the city. Home was a good 40-minute drive away. I sighed, turned up my collar, and stepped out from under the shelter. The cold rain immediately soaked my hair and dripped down my neck. I walked toward the bus stop. Then, as if in answer to my silent prayer, a yellow silhouette appeared in the distance. The car moved slowly, as if searching for someone. On the roof sat a rectangular sign with glowing red letters, "Taxi." A wave of relief washed over me. Without thinking, I threw up my hand and stepped to the edge of the road. The car smoothly rolled up and stopped, its old wipers squeaking against the glass. "Good evening," a grovelly voice called out from the cabin. "Get in, beauty, before you get completely soaked. Where are we heading?" I hurried inside and slammed the door. The cabin greeted me with warm, stale air smelling of tobacco, sweat, and something else, sweet and musty like an old basement. But it didn't matter. It was warm and dry. "Oh, the weather is just a nightmare. Thank you so much. You really saved me. Builders Street, House 45, third entrance, please." The driver nodded, shifting the gear lever. The car, an old egg yolk yellow Volga, moved off gently. In the light of the dashboard, I got a look at him. He was a stocky, sturdy man in his 50s with thick black mustaches and hair graying at the temples. Massive rings glinted on his thick fingers. When he turned to look back, gold crowns flashed on a few of his teeth. His smile was wide, almost too welcoming. "You don't see many people out in this weather. Work nearby?" he asked, turning his eyes back to the road. "Yes, at the bar," I answered, shortly, trying not to breathe too deeply. The smell in the car was thick, clinging like a second skin. "Tough work. People get drunk, probably pester you." "Sometimes," I said, staring out the window. The rain turned the world into a blurred watercolor. Lanterns stretched into yellow stripes. Shop windows melted into colored spots. "Don't worry, girl. I'll get you there fast," he grinned into the mirror. The car turned off the main street into my district, but for some reason it didn't take the usual route. We headed into dark, narrow alleys. I immediately felt nervous. I think we're going the wrong way." "Traffic jam tonight. Repairs," the driver said carelessly. "I know a shortcut. Don't worry." I nodded, but anxiety stirred deep inside. Fatigue, nerves, the darkness, it was playing with my imagination. I looked out the window again. The landscape looked wrong. The houses seemed to lose their clarity, their edges blurring as if viewed through thick, muddy water. The familiar supermarket on the corner seemed shrouded in haze, its bright sign glowing dimly like a dying star. "It's cold, beauty. I can turn up the heater," the driver said. "No, everything's fine," I replied,
feeling goosebumps, not from the cold, but from something else. I glanced at the driver. He sat slightly swaying to the movement of the car, his thick fingers drumming on the steering wheel. Suddenly, he went silent. Not just stopped talking, he became absolutely silent. Even his heavy, wheezing breath vanished.
A silence fell over the cabin so deep my ears started to ring. Only the howling wind outside and the rustle of tires on wet asphalt remained. I looked up at the rearview mirror and froze. In the mirror, in the darkness of the back seat, sat silhouettes, vague, blurred like shadows cast by a flickering flame. They sat motionless, staring straight ahead, but I felt the weight of their gazes on me. I slowly turned my head. The back seat was empty. Only my bag lay there. My heart began to pound against my ribs. I looked back at the mirror. They were there. The silhouettes were clearer now. One had an unnaturally twisted neck. Another seemed to be crying, covering its face with its hands. A third was staring directly at me from the mirror world, and its eye sockets were empty. "Are you comfortable?" the taxi driver suddenly asked. His voice sounded so close, as if he had leaned right against my ear. I flinched, pulling away toward the door. "What? Yes, fine. We'll be there soon." But we didn't arrive. Minutes stretched as if turning into hours, hours that shouldn't have existed. The road outside the window lost all landmarks. Occasionally, silhouettes of buildings flashed by, but these weren't houses from my city. They were somber, gray structures with empty eye sockets of windows and crooked roofs reaching into the low, leaden sky. Sometimes figures stood on the roadside, motionless, turned toward the road. It felt like they were watching the car with eyes I couldn't see, but felt with my skin. "Where are we?" My voice broke, sounding thin and alien. The driver no longer looked in the mirror. He stared straight ahead, his face turned to stone, motionless and devoid of that performative friendliness. "I want to get out. Stop, please." "Right here? You can't, beauty. You can't stop here. There are many evil people out at night. It's dangerous to wander alone." There wasn't a hint of persuasion in his voice, only a cold, iron-like statement of fact. And that smile, that same golden smile, was still frozen on his face, but now it looked like a painted mask. "Stop right now!" I screamed, grabbing the door handle. The handle wouldn't budge, as if it were welded shut. The driver slowly turned his head toward me, not his whole body, just his head. It was turned at an unnatural angle. His neck cracked loudly like dry branches. The sound echoed in my mind, making me cower in the seat. "Now, shut up and sit still," he said. His voice no longer held even a drop of his former kind intonation. "We'll be there soon." I recoiled, pressing my back against the door. Panic, sharp and uncontrollable, rose in my throat. Not knowing how to react, I closed my eyes tightly, trying to gather my thoughts. "Breathe, just breathe. This is a nightmare, a dream from exhaustion," I comforted myself. But the cold of the seat, the smell of decay and dust intensifying every second, it was all terrifyingly real. This wasn't just a kidnapping, it was something else, something wrong, unnatural. I looked at the driver, at his thick hands on the wheel, and my gaze drifted down. I saw his legs, or rather, what was in place of legs. Where there should have been feet in sneakers or shoes, there was something else, something dark, covered in short, bristly fur.
and at the end, not feet, but hard black cloven hooves. They pressed against the pedals, and instead of a metal click, there was a barely audible dull thud of bone. I blinked and stared again. No, reality was cruel. Those were real hooves. Oh my God, those are actual hooves! The whole world flipped in that moment, shrinking into a point of chilling horror. All the oddities, the blurred city, the shadows in the mirror, the endless road formed one monstrous picture. This wasn't a taxi, it was a trap. I wasn't in a car with a weird driver, I was in a cage with a demon. Images of nightmares and grandmother's scary stories swirled in my head, tales of a power that roams the outskirts of the world, picking up lost souls. The taxi to nowhere. Suddenly words flashed in my memory, vivid as a spark. My grandmother's voice, quiet but clear. She grew up in a remote village and knew all the omens, the charms, the stories of what walks the world besides humans. Remember, evil spirits are dangerous, but sometimes they are stupid. They live outside our time. If one pesters you, if it won't let go, tell it, "Come yesterday." It knocks them off balance. They can't stand that confusion, and they'll run away in a daze. At 10 years old, I had laughed at the image of a woodland scratching his head in confusion. Now those words were the only lifeline in a raging sea of hopelessness.
The car sped along an absolutely empty, straight road that vanished into the black void. A lifeless wasteland stretched on both sides, dotted with crooked, bare trees that looked more like the skeletons of giants. The taxi driver spoke again, and his voice returned to its former, almost human intonation, but now it held a sticky, sickly sweetness. "Do you like riding with me, beauty? We could see each other, at least occasionally. I'd take you wherever you want, to beautiful places. Well, what do you say? Great, right?" He turned around, truly turned around, his vertebrae cracking terribly. His neck stretched out, becoming unnaturally long with thick, bulging veins. A grin like a snarl stretched unnaturally all the way to his ears, revealing rows of small, sharp yellow teeth like a fish's rather than golden crowns. His face changed too. The skin became too smooth and white, stretched like parchment. His eyes, small and deep-set, glowed with a dull yellow light like a nocturnal predator's. Everything swam before my eyes. I felt nauseous. One last attempt to pull myself together, I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. The sharp, real pain helped me gather the remnants of my will. I straightened up, looked directly into those yellow eyes, and said clearly, enunciating the words as my grandmother had taught me, "Come yesterday." The effect was instantaneous. The sly grin slid off the driver's face like a mask. His features distorted with genuine, wild bewilderment mixed with rage. He jerked his head sharply. Another crack sounded. "What? What did you say?" I felt my cheeks burn from the adrenaline rush. A moment later, I repeated louder and more confidently, "Come yesterday." The taxi driver's face contorted. It began to change, losing all familiar human features. The skin darkened, covered with wrinkled cracks. His mustache shriveled into tufts of bristles. And his eyes flared with an infernal crimson fire. A roar erupted, inhuman and filled with such rabid malice that the car windows trembled. The Volga roared its engine and surged forward with such force that I was thrown back into the seat. The world outside the window became a blurred streak of darkness. The car tossed from side to side, racing along a road that now twisted and turned as if heading into unknown alien dimensions. The cabin smelled of sulfur and burning. The shadows in the back seat stirred, agitated, reaching out towards me with their shapeless limbs, but they seemed afraid to get too close.
The driver, now barely resembling a human, sat gripping the wheel with long, bony claws tipped with dirty claws. He muttered something, grinding his teeth, and curses in an extinct language could be heard in his mumbling. I huddled in the seat, repeating to myself like a mantra, "Come yesterday, come yesterday." I was afraid that if I stopped, I would lose this fragile protective barrier. Suddenly, there was a sharp, piercing screech of brakes. The car spun in place. I was slammed into the seatbelt with great force. Silence. We were standing at the same bus stop where I had entered the car. The rain was still drizzling, illuminated by the same street lamp. The familiar sign for the bar was visible about 20 meters away. The passenger door opened with a dull click. I didn't think twice. Instinctive self-preservation threw me out of the cabin onto the wet asphalt. I didn't look back. I didn't check for my bag. I just ran. I ran as I never had in my life, feeling the cold air burn my lungs and my heart ready to jump out of my chest. Only after running about 100 meters did I dare to look back. The street was empty. No yellow Volga, no tire tracks on the wet asphalt. Only the rain quietly pattering on the roofs and a lonely dog huddling further into an alleyway. With a staggering gait, I made it home. My hand shook so much that it took 3 tries to get the key into the lock. Once inside the apartment, I locked all the locks, put on the chain, and propped a heavy table against the door. Then I turned on every light I could find and curled up on the couch, covered to my head with a blanket. My body shook with a slight tremor that did not subside until morning. I did not sleep, listening to every sound in the house. But nothing happened. In the morning, when the first rays of sun painted the sky a pale pink, the trembling finally eased. I went to the window. The street lived its usual life. Cars drove by, people rushed to work. The world was sharp and real again. 3 days later, when my partner returned, I threw my arms around his neck and burst into tears, telling him a disjointed story about the taxi, the rain, and the hooves. He listened, stroking my hair, saying it was just a nightmare, a hallucination from exhaustion. He convinced me to see a doctor and take some mild sedatives. However, I no longer walk at night, and I call a taxi very rarely and only through the app.